Stargirl, set 10. Usually I saw her in the courtyard before school, but that day I didn't. Usually I passed her between classes at least once or twice before lunch. Not that day. In fact, when I looked over to her table at lunch, there was Dory Dilson, as usual, but someone else was sitting there with her. No Stargirl in sight. Coming out of the lunchroom, I heard laughter behind me and then a voice. Stargirl's. What do you have to do to get somebody's attention around here? I turned, but it wasn't her. The girl standing, grinning in front of me, wore jeans and sandals, had burnt red nails and lipstick, painted eyes, finger rings, toe rings, hoop earrings I could put my hand through, and hair. I gawked as students swarmed past. She made a clownish grin. She was beginning to look vaguely familiar. Tentatively, I whispered, Stargirl? She batted her chocolatey eyelashes. Stargirl? What kind of a name is that? My name is Susan. And just like that, Stargirl was gone, replaced by Susan. Susan Julia Caraway, the girl she might have been all along. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She cradled her books in her arms. The sunflower canvas bag was gone. The rat was gone. The ukulele was gone. She turned around slowly for my opened mouth, dumbstruck inspection. Nothing goofy, nothing different could I see. She looked magnificently, wonderfully, gloriously ordinary. She looked just like 100 other girls at Micah High. Stargirl had vanished into a sea of them, and I was thrilled. She slid a stick of chewing gum into her mouth and chewed away noisily. She winked at me. She reached out and tweaked my cheek the way my grandmother would and said, What's up, cutie? I grabbed her right there outside the lunchroom in the swarming mob. I didn't care if others were watching. In fact, I hoped they were. I grabbed her and squeezed her. I had never been so happy and so proud in my life. We sailed through time. We held hands in the hallways, on the stairs, in the courtyard. In the lunchroom, I grabbed her and I pulled her over to our table. I looked to invite Dory Dilson too, but she was gone. I sat there grinning while Kevin and Susan gabbed and gossiped over their sandwiches. They joked about her disastrous appearance on Hot Seat. Susan suggested that I should go on Hot Seat one of these days, and Kevin said, No, he's too shy. And I said, Not anymore. And we all laughed. And it was true. I didn't walk. I strutted. I was Susan Caraway's boyfriend. I. Me. Really? That's Susan Caraway? The one with the tiny barrettes and toe rings? Yep, that's the one. My girlfriend. Call me Mr. Susan. I started saying we instead of I, as in we'll meet you there, or we like fajitas. Whenever I could, I said her name out loud, like blowing bubbles. The rest of the time, I said it to myself, Susan, Susan. We did our homework together. We hung out with Kevin. Instead of following strangers around, we went to the movies and plunged our hands together into the $6 super tub of popcorn. Instead of shopping for African violets, we shopped for Cinnabons and licked icing from each other's fingers. We went into to Pizza. We walked past the bulletin board instead inside the door. We shared a pizza, half pepperoni, half anchovies. Anchovies, ugh, I said. What's wrong with anchovies? She said. How can you eat them? Nobody eats anchovies. I was sort of kidding, but her face was serious. Nobody? Nobody I know. She picked the anchovies from her slices and dumped them into her water glass. I tried to stop her. Hey! She pushed my hand away. She dropped the last anchovy into the glass. I don't want to be like nobody. On the way out, we ignored the bulletin board. She was mad for shopping. It was as if she had just discovered clothes. She bought shirts and pants and shorts and costume jewelry and makeup. I began to notice that the items of clothing had one thing in common. They all had the designer's name plastered prominently on them. She seemed to buy not for color or style, but for designer label size. She constantly quizzed me about what other kids would do, would buy, would say, would think. She invented a fictitious person whom she called Evelyn Everybody. Would Evelyn like this? Would Evelyn do that? Sometimes she misfired, as with laughing. For several days she was on a laughing jag. She didn't just laugh, she boomed. Heads turned in the lunchroom. I was trying to work up the nerve to say something when she looked at Kevin and me and said, "Would Evelyn laugh this much?" Kevin stared at his sandwich. I sheepishly shook my head. The laughing stopped. And from that moment on, she did a perfect imitation of a sullen, pout-lipped teenager. In every way, she seemed to be a typical, ordinary, everyday, run-of-the-mill teenager, and it wasn't working. At first, I neither noticed nor much cared that the shunning continued. I was too busy being happy that she was, as I saw it, now one of us. My only regret was that we could not play the basketball season over again. In my mind's eye, I pictured her aiming her incredible zeal and energy exclusively at the electrons. We would have won games on her cheering alone. It was she who said it first, "They still don't like me." We were standing outside the TV studio after school. As usual, people were passing by as if we weren't there. Her lip quivered. What am I doing wrong? Tears made her eyes even larger. I squeezed her hand. I told her to give us some time. I pointed out that the state basketball finals would take place in Phoenix that Saturday, and that would end the season and clear the way for her cheerleading crimes to be forgotten. Her mascara was muddy. I had seen her sad many times before, but always for someone else. This was different. This was for herself, and I was powerless to help. I could not find it in me to cheer up the cheerleader. That night, we did homework together at her house. I ducked into her room to check out her happy wagon. There were only 2 stones in it. When I came to school next day, there was something different about the buzz in the courtyard. The arriving students were milling about, some roaming at random, some in clusters, but as I approached, there seemed to be a distinct clearing around the palmetto. I wandered in that direction, and through the crowd, I could see that someone, Susan, was seated on the bench. She sat upright and smiling. She was holding a foot-long stick shaped like a claw on one end. Around her neck, dangling on a string, was a sign that read, "Talk to me or I'll scratch your back." And I'll scratch your back. She was getting no takers. No one was within 20 feet of her. Quickly, I turned away. I walked back through the crowd. I pretended I was looking for someone. I pretended I hadn't seen her, and I prayed for the bell to ring. When I saw her later that morning, the sign was gone. She said nothing about it. Neither did I. Next morning, she came running at me in the courtyard. Her eyes were bright for the first time in days. She grabbed me with both hands and shook me. "It's going to be okay. It's going to end. I had a vision." She told me about it. She had gone to her enchanted place after dinner the day before, and that's where the vision had come to her. She had seen herself returning in triumph from the Arizona State Oratorical Contest. She had won first prize, best in the state. When she returned, she got a hero's welcome. The whole school greeted her in the parking lot, just like in the assembly film. There were streamers and confetti and tooting kazoos and horns blaring, and the mayor and the city council were on hand, and they had a parade right then and there. And she rode high on the back seat of a convertible and held her winner's silver plate up for all to see, and the happy faces of her classmates flashed in the sparkling trophy. She told me this, and she threw up her arms and shouted, "I'm going to be popular!" The state contest was a week away. Every day she practiced her speech. One day she called over little Peter Sinkowitz and his playmates and presented the speech to us from her front steps. We applauded and whistled. She bowed grandly, and I, too, began to see her vision. I saw the streamers flying, and I heard the ground cheering, and I believed. "And our best wishes go with you, Susan Caraway." PA announcements echoed through the school lobby, and we were off to Phoenix. The driver was Mr. McShane, Micah High's faculty representative to the state contest. Susan and I sat in the back. Susan's parents were driving their own car and would meet us in Phoenix. As we pulled out of the parking lot, she wagged a finger in my face. "Don't get a big head, mister. I was allowed to invite 2 friends along. You weren't the only one I asked. So who was the other? I said. Dory. Well, then I said, I think I'll go for the big head. Dory isn't another guy. She grinned. No, she's not one of those. Suddenly she unbuckled her seatbelt. We each had a back window. Mr. McShane, she announced, I'm moving over so I can sit close to Leo. He's so cute. I can't help myself. In the rearview mirror, the teacher's eyes crinkled. Whatever you like, Susan, it's your day. She slid over and fastened herself into the middle belt. She jabbed me. Hear that? It's my day. I get whatever I want. So, I said, what happened when you asked Dory Dilson? She said no. She's mad at me. I could tell. Ever since I became Susan, she just doesn't understand how important it is to be popular. I wasn't sure what to say to that. I was feeling a little uneasy. Fortunately, wondering what to say wasn't much of a problem for me during the 2 hour ride because Susan chattered away like the old Stargirl the whole time. But I know Dory, she said, and I'll tell you one thing. What's that? She'll be in the front of the mob cheering for me when we get back tomorrow. Later found out that after we left the school, the principal had spoken again on the PA. He announced our expected time of return on Saturday and suggested that everyone be on hand to meet us, win or lose. Losing, as it turned out, never occurred to the contestant herself. Would you do me a favor for me? She said. I told her sure. That big silver plate that goes to the winner? I'm such a klutz with dishes at home. Would you hold it for me when the crowd rushes me? I'm afraid I'll drop it. I stared at her. What crowd? What rush? In the school parking lot. When we get back tomorrow, there's always a crowd waiting for the returning hero. Remember the film at school? My vision? She cocked her head and peered into my eyes. She rapped my forehead with her knuckles. Hello in there. Anybody home? Oh, I said. That crowd. She nodded. Exactly. Of course. We'll be safe as long as we're in the car. But once we get out, who knows what will happen? Crowds can be pretty wild, right, Mr. McShane? The teacher nodded. So I hear. She spoke to me as if instructing a first grader. Leo, this has never happened in Micah before. Having a winner of the Arizona State Oratorical Contest, one of their very own. When they hear about it, they're going to go bananas. And when they get a gander at me and that trophy, she rolled her eyes and whistled. I just hope they don't get out of hand. The police will keep them in line. I said, maybe they'll call out the National Guard. She stared wide eyed. You think? She didn't realize I was kidding. Well, she said, I'm really not afraid for myself. I won't mind a little jostling. Do you think they'll jostle Mr. McShane? In the mirror, his eyes shifted to us. Never can tell. And if they want to carry me around on their shoulders, that's okay too. They better not. She poked me with her finger. Better not mess with my trophy. That's why you, another poke, are going to hold it tight. I wish Mr. McShane would say something. Susan, I said, did you ever hear of counting your chickens before they hatch, you mean? Exactly. I hear you're not supposed to do that. Exactly. She nodded thoughtfully. Never made me. I mean, if you know they're going to hatch, why not count them? Because you can't know. I said, there's no guarantee. I hate to break this to you, but you're not the only person in the contest. Somebody else could win. You could lose. It's possible. She thought about that for a moment, then shook her head. Nope, not possible. So she threw up her arms and smiled hugely. Why wait to feel great? Celebrate now. That's my motto. She nuzzled into me. What's yours, big boy? Don't count your chickens, I said. She shuddered mockingly. Oh, you're such a poop, Leo. What's your motto, Mr. McShane? Drive carefully, he said. You may have a winner in that car. That set her off howling. Mr. McShane, I said, you're not helping. Sorry. He lied. I just looked at her. You're going to be in a state contest. I said, aren't you just a little bit nervous? The smile vanished. Yes, I am. I'm a lot nervous. I just hope things don't get out of hand when we get back to the school. I've never been adorned by mobs of people before. I'm not sure how I'm going to react. I hope I don't get a big head. Do you think I'm the big head type, Mr. McShane? I raised my hand. Can I answer that? I think your head is just fine, said the teacher. She jabbed me with her elbow. Hear that, Mr. Know-it-all? She gave me her smug face, which promptly disappeared as she thrust up her arms and yelped. They're going to love me! Mr. McShane wagged his head and chuckled. Silently, I gave up. She pointed out the window. Look, even the desert is celebrating. It seemed to be true. The normally dull cacti and scrub were splashed with April colors, as if a great painter had passed over the landscape with a brush, dabbling yellow here and red there. Susan strained against her seatbelt. Mr. McShane, can we stop here just for a minute, please? When the teacher hesitated, she said, You said that it'd be my day. I get whatever I want. The car coasted to a stop along the gravelly roadside. In a moment, she was out the door and bounding across the desert. She skipped and whirled and cartwheeled among the prickly natives. She bowed to a yucca, waltzed with a saguaro. She, she plucked a red blossom from a barrel cactus and fixed it to her hair. She practiced her smile and her nod and her wave, one hand, two hand, to the adoring mob at her hero's welcome. She snapped a needle from a cactus the and with the slapstick but pantomime of circus clown pretended to pick her teeth with it. Mr. McShane and I were leaning on the car, laughing, when suddenly she stopped, cocked her head, and stared off in another direction. She stayed like that, still, for a good 2 minutes, then abruptly turned and came back to the car. Her face was thoughtful. Mr. McShane, she said as the teacher drove off, do you know any extinct birds? Passenger pigeons, he said. That's probably the best known. They say there used to be so many of them that they would darken the sky when they flew over. And the moa. Moa? Huge bird. Like a condor, I said. He chuckled. A condor wouldn't come up to its knee. Make an ostrich look small. 12, 13 feet tall, maybe the biggest bird ever. Couldn't fly. Lived in New Zealand. Died out hundreds of years ago. Killed off by people. Half their size? Said Susan. Mr. McShane nodded. I wrote a report about moa in grade school. I thought they were the neatest thing. Susan's eyes were gleaming. Did moas have a voice? The teacher thought about it. I don't know. I don't know if anybody does. Susan looked out the window at the passing desert. I heard a mockingbird back there, and it made me think of something Archie said. Mr. Brubaker, said Mr. McShane. Yes, he said he believes mockingbirds may be more than imitate their other birds. I mean, other living birds. He thinks they may also imitate the sounds of birds that are no longer around. He thinks the sound of extinct birds are passed down the years from mockingbirds to mockingbirds. Interesting thought, said Mr. McShane. He says when a mockingbird sings, for all we know, it's pitching fossils into the air. He says that who knows what songs of ancient creatures we may be hearing out there. The words of Archie Brubaker settled over the silence in the car. As if reading my thoughts, Mr. McShane turned off the air conditioner and powered down the windows. Air blew in a faint, smoky scent of mesquite. After a while, I felt the touch of Susan's hand. Her fingers wove through mine. Mr. McShane, she cooed, we're holding hands in the back seat. Uh-oh, he said. Hormonal teenagers. Don't you think he's cute, Mr. McShane? Well, I never really thought about it, said the teacher. Well, look, she said. She grabbed my face in her hand and pulled it forward. The teacher's eyes considered me briefly in the rearview mirror. You're right. He's adorable. Susan released my blushing face. Told you. Don't you just love him? I wouldn't go that far. A minute later. Mr. McShane. Now I felt something in my ears. I'm putting my finger in his ear. This sort of silliness went on until we rounded a mesa and saw the brown mist on the horizon that announced our approach to the city of Phoenix. Her parents met us in the lobby of the hotel where Susan, Mr. McShane, and I each had a room for the night. After we checked in, the five of us ate a buffet lunch in the hotel restaurant. Then we watched Susan board a bus that would take her and 18 other contestants to Phoenix West High School. There were 38 contestants. 19 had already given their speeches that morning. By the end of the afternoon, 10 finalists would be chosen. The finals would take place that evening. To be honest, none of us was surprised that Susan made the cut. She was incredibly good. The surprise was this: her speech was new. It was not the one she had given at Micah High. It was not the one that she had been practicing for weeks in front of me and Peter Sinkowitz and assorted saguaros. It was not the one that I had heard just the day before. But it was wonderful. There were some elements of the old speech in it, and much that was as new as that morning, like a butterfly. Her words fluttered from image to image. She swung from the distant past, Barney Archie's Paleosone rodent school, to the present, cinnamon, to the distant future, death of the sun. From the most ordinary here, the old man nodding off on the bench at Tudor Village, to the most extraordinary there, a newly discovered galaxy, 90% to the end of the universe. She touched on silver lunch trucks and designer labels and enchanted places. And when she said her best friend gave her pet rat a ride on his shoulder, tears came to my eyes. It was a jumble, it was a mismatch, and somehow she pulled it all together. Somehow she threaded every different thing through the voice of a solitary mockingbird singing in the desert. She called her speech, I Might Have Heard a Moa. The auditorium was half full, mostly with small groups of students and parents from the competing schools. After a contestant finished, his or her supporters whistled and whooped as if doing so would influence the judges. The rest was polite applause. When Susan finished, the four of us managed a modest cheer, but that was about it. No whistles, no whoops. I think that we were made of more timid stuff than the speechmaker herself. Back at the hotel, Mr. McShane and I mobbed her. If two can be a mob, her parents were more reserved. They were full of smiles and well dones, but they seemed no more surprised at her success than Susan did. When the adults went off to the gift shop, I had her to myself. I said, Where did that come from? She grinned. Did you like it? Sure, but it's not what I've been hearing for the last month. What were you doing? Practicing a secret speech on the side? The grin got wider. Nope. That was the first time I heard it, too. I stared at her. Slowly, her words sank in. Let me get this straight. You're saying you just made it up this morning? I'm saying I didn't even make it up. It was just there. All I did was open my mouth and let it out. She held both hands out to me and snapped her fingers. Presto! I gaped at her. What are you going to say tonight? She threw out her arms. Who knows? The five of us ate an early dinner in the hotel restaurant. Afterwards, we waited in the lobby while Susan changed her clothes. She stepped off the elevator wearing a peach-colored pantsuit. She slinked across the lobby, modeling for us. She sat on her mother's lap and said, My personal seamstress made it for me. We applauded lightly and sent her off on the bus. The general public was invited to the evening show, and the auditorium was packed. People stood in back. Down front, a high school orchestra played rousing music by John Philip Sousa. The 10 contestants sat on stage. 7 were boys. All of the contestants appeared to be grim and nervous, stiff as mannequins, except for Susan, who was bending the ear of the boy sitting next to her. He nodded occasionally, but kept his eyes and spine at attention and obviously wished that she would shut up. Susan's parents chuckled knowingly at her behavior, while I tried to disguise a stab of jealousy. One by one, the contestants took the long walk to center stage to give their speeches. The applause was equally hearty for all. A grade school girl in a frilly white dress handed each contestant a bouquet of roses, yellow for the girls, red for the boys. While the girls cradled their roses, the boys looked at them as if they were hand grenades. Susan was next to last to speak. When her name was called, she bounced up from her chair and practically ran to the microphone. She did a sprightly pirouette, a curtsy, waved her hand in a window washer motion, and said, "Hi." Accustomed to seeing stiff, mortified contestants, the auditorium responded with uncertain titters. They didn't know what to make of this unconventional teenager any more than we had on the first day of school. Several bold souls said, "Hi," and waved back. She did not begin, at least not in the usual sense. There was no ringing preamble. She merely stood there, comfortably chatting away as if we were all on rocking chairs on her front porch. Murmur drifted toward the ceiling. People were waiting for her to get started. The murmur subsided as it occurred to them that this was it, and they were missing it. The quiet that then fell over the auditorium was absolute. I was more tuned into the audience than to the speaker, and if for the last 5 minutes of her talk anyone was breathing, I could not detect it. When she finished with barely a whisper, "Can you hear it?" and leaned with her cupped hand to her ear, 1,500 people seemed to inch forward, straining to hear. There were 10 seconds of purest stillness. Then she turned abruptly and went back to her chair. Still, there was no reaction. What's going on? I wondered. She sat forward in her chair, her hand primly in her lap, and then it came suddenly, explosively, as if everyone had awakened at once. We were all on our feet, clapping and shouting and whistling. I found myself sobbing. The cheering was as wild as that of the crowd of a championship basketball game.